Hello, and thank you for joining me on the front line. I'm Gary Payinda, and today we're going to be looking at some of the news of the past week and taking a bit of a deeper dive to get you the facts behind the stories. Our first up story today is um, is this one. It's a longstanding problem. It's about Taupo and Rotorua hospitals that have been struggling to get enough doctors to staff them for many months now. And what has happened recently is a bit of I think it's a leak of a contingency plan. So RNZ obtained a copy of the escalation and closure plan for Topal Hospital, which outlines what could happen if the hospital were forced to shut down due to not finding enough staff. So this emergency department and this small hospital takes care of about 40,000 people, and has typically been working with far fewer doctors and other healthcare staff than needed. Uh, the numbers here that are quoted in this article are 3.3 senior doctors working there permanently out of 9. That means the the shortfall is made up mostly of locum, so temporary doctors um, who work elsewhere and come to help out to the extent they're able to when they can. And there have been a lot of roster gaps. And the risk, of course, is a scenario which every doctor shudders to think about. It's this is a story from September of 2024 about a patient dying in the emergency department waiting room at Rotorua Hospital, and the problem here was described as a patient had to wait 3 hours in the waiting room, but should have been seen within half an hour to an hour. I believe they had a heart attack with a fatal outcome. Um, this long-standing problem still continues. So here we've got an article from April talking about at Topal Hospital, the senior doctor shortage was raising fears of closures back then. They quoted the rosters for May and June, seen by RNZ, showed that just 28% of all shifts were filled by permanent senior doctors. And there's a bit of scrambling going on at many hospitals, many public hospitals around the country, to cover unfilled shifts. And what that could take the form of is, let's say, a WhatsApp group where on a regular basis doctors are asked if they can pick up additional shifts. So yeah, this escalation plan became leaked to the media, and the plan outlined 6 scenarios. Um, a couple scenarios involved transferring doctors over from Rotorua to Topal to staff the general ward, its ward, and the emergency department. But of course, the problem is that Rotorua does not have enough doctors to staff itself with any kind of surplus. They're also in an understaffed scenario. The third option here was to close the general ward and transfer patients over. Another was to use telehealth for emergency department patients. Another involved just closing down the emergency department, which sees about 50 a day. And the last would be closing down the wards more extensively, including the general medical wards and the birthing unit. Yeah, this is a problem. I think this is the current clinical leader, told RNZ this week that the escalation and closure plan wasn't a quote active plan, and that what they try to do is always see emergency cases, always take care of the patients, and always try to find some way of staffing the shifts. Now, we know in Westport, on the West Coast, there had been several episodes last year where they were unable to actually staff the emergency department and had to close things down. So that's what all of the understaffed rural hospitals are worried about. Said a different doctor, it's probably been known about for a couple of years. With that short staffing, there's going to be gaps in the normal everyday roster. So as a group, we were trying to say to management, look, this is a risk to the organization. The union said, ASMS said, between 40 and 50% of the roster at any given time is filled either by locums, temporary doctors, or their employed staff are being prevailed upon to do extra shifts, extra work for extra pay to keep the place open. This is hand-to-mouth subsistence stuff. The problem, of course, is that becomes unsustainable when you've got doctors working their regular allotted amount of hours and then having to pick up additional shifts. They can only do that for so long before you get people leaving. And so you could think of this problem with staffing as almost like a bucket that you're trying to keep filled with water, but it's got some holes in it. And one hole could be doctors having to pick up so many irregular permanent staff having to pick up so many shifts that they seek to preserve their mental and physical health by cutting down their overall hours. And you do see this extensively, people trying to take an understaffed department where maybe they're missing, well, in some cases, up to 40% of their colleagues, and they end up not being able to do a full-time roster. You also see people choosing to retire early. We've got a graying of the workforce, and people will be increasingly apt to vacate the workforce a bit sooner than they might have. Then, of course, you've got the lure of Australia, which we know that nationally, New Zealand has been hemorrhaging tens of thousands of people a year to Australia this year. Many of them young, in the prime of their careers, looking to get paid better and have better working conditions, which inarguably exist. Sometimes looking at a better staff department with more doctors, more healthcare assistants, more nurses, and higher pay, which all make it easier to work. And what we have to realize is there's not actually a doctor shortage. There is no shortage. We have a great failure to retain and keep our doctors here. So many of the doctors that come from abroad will end up leaving. But even worse than that, probably the worst thing, is that many of our doctors who were young and were trained here, and who wanted to work here, have looked for safer work environments elsewhere. And for many, that will mean a move to Australia. And so it doesn't matter how many new medical schools you create or how many new doctors you import, or whether you, like they're currently trying to do, is lowering the sort of bar for coming to work in New Zealand and broadening the pool of potential foreign doctors. You can do all those things, but if you're hemorrhaging them faster than you are creating them, you will always end up in this scenario that we are in. What is different, and many people would say this is a longstanding problem, and certainly it is, but what's different is that things have gotten worse, and some of the public policies that have been brought in will only accelerate the problem. It's like throwing fuel on a fire. So specifically, I'm talking about giving millions and ultimately hundreds of millions in public taxpayer money to the private for-profit healthcare sector. And what that does, and what it has done, is create an enormous industry of specialty clinics, private hospitals, telehealth, and radiology groups out there. Many of them owned by big conglomerates, um, international international private equity corporations. Um, and what you have there is increased competition for the same pool of doctors. And we know that in the private sector, pay is higher and the patients are cherry picked to be more profitable and easier to take care of. It's essentially a quick flick is how you could describe the ideal private patient. And what happens is, of course, those are the most profitable patients for these corporations, these healthcare corporations, to take care of. They don't want the grievously ill, poor, comorbid, elderly patient with diabetes and complicated surgeries. They avoid those like the plague, leaving those in the public system. But they do take the simple ones that can be the most profitable. And so we've got a horrible situation now of doctors leaving the public system to go into private. The pay is higher, the work is arguably easier, the patients are inarguably and definitely easier, and you're seeing a hemorrhaging. So we talked about this bucket where you've got some holes, people leaving for better working conditions elsewhere, but you've actually got a hole that's getting wider, and the bucket's losing even more doctors and nurses. And that, of course, is privatization. And we're really seeing. I think anesthetists are some of the most the numbers of public doctors that have been dropping the fastest, and simultaneously increasing in the private sector the fastest. So there's a direct relationship here. When you privatize New Zealand's healthcare, you weaken and erode its public staffing, making problems like uh, this one at Taupo Hospital even worse. Um, we've got to address this. We've got to make it better, because this is a problem not just at one ED. This is a problem throughout the country. It is, of course, worse in areas that are traditionally underserved: Northland, East Cape, South Auckland, and just rural EDs across the country. Well, not just EDs, but hospitals. But yeah, it's a problem that is accelerating. So we've got 3.3 permanent doctors covering the work of what should be 9 doctors. You can imagine that your regular staff will not stick around forever when they're being pushed to do work that should be done by 3 times as many doctors. So, the things that public policies need to do is kind of the opposite of what they've been doing. They've got to retain doctors. They've got to correct nurse understaffing, because nationally the numbers are roughly that 25 to 50% of all nurse shifts in our public hospitals are understaffed. So when you don't have safe nurse staffing, it makes the job that the doctor is trying to do vastly harder and less efficient. So, and the same applies to healthcare assistants, some of the lowest paid workers, but most essential workers that keep a hospital functioning. The orderlies in a hospital that move patients around and stock equipment and provide care to patients as well. Um, and you probably, in all of this, if you're a government, you probably shouldn't call public health doctors muppets that should be put in their box. You probably, so that was David Seymour's words. You probably shouldn't do, in Simeon Brown's case, the Minister of Health, this interesting scenario where he's repeatedly gone on social media to um, direct attacks towards doctors and nurses who are in contract negotiations, saying they are greedy and using patients as pawns in the negotiations. and saying that they are paid well enough and that the offers are good enough. Just on that last note, I don't want to rehash things I've said before, but the kinds of offers that these nurses and doctors are getting are lower than the cost of inflation. And I find it interesting that Simeon Brown himself, as a cabinet minister, he's making $327,000 a year. He has a pension that is that has a match at 2.5 times what he contributes, up to a maximum of 20%. That's extraordinarily generous. But interestingly, during this time that he is willing to offer nurses and doctors less than 1 to 2% pay rises during a time that inflation is running higher than that, he has received 4 pay rises of 2.8%, the following year 2.9%, the following year 2.4%, and then in 2026 he'll get 2.0%. And I find it interesting that 4 consecutive good pay rises in a row were backdated, which of course they don't want to do for the healthcare workers. And they're backdated and generous and keeping up with inflation. And that's on top of all the $50,000 in housing and the $16,000 for things like flowers and raffle tickets that they're allowed as a basic allowance. So we're talking about a man with a package of probably upwards of 400,000, maybe up to 450, whose salary has risen really nicely during this time of financial distress for the country, who is criticizing nurses for wanting safer staffing and to not go backwards in their pay. I find this quite amazing. Yeah, I think I'll stop this there. This article I found interesting, and I certainly wish the patients and doctors luck as they seek to fill their shifts in a sustainable way. Yeah, what can I say? Tell me what you think of this. Put your comments down below. If you want stories like this, a little bit of a deep dive, let me know, and I'll try to do my best to bring that to you. Just a quick addendum. I don't always want to be railing about negativity and the bad things that are going on in our essential public services right now. I do want to say that one great thing has happened for Taupo ED, which is getting a CT scanner. This probably costs a couple $1 million. It has ongoing costs in terms of getting radiologists to read the scans, but the importance to the quality of life of a community that a CT scanner provides can't be overestimated. If you are in a rural and remote place, you definitely want access to a CT scanner in your local emergency department. And the reason for that is, with great accuracy, it can take patients with brain bleeds or blood clots in the lungs or abdominal emergencies, appendicitis or ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysms, and it can diagnose them quickly and effectively. So props to Topol for staffing that hospital or resourcing that hospital with a CT scanner. That's what other hospitals around the country are trying to get. Kaitaia has been pushing for one for quite a while, and that's one really good thing. All right, let's move on now to another story. So I'd like the front line to not just deal with the social determinants of health, things like poverty, access, politics, and health policy, but also talk about some of the science that's coming out right now that is of interest to people and to uh, healthcare professionals as well. So this was an article in El País that I was looking at, and it talked about uh, imidazole propionate, which is it's essentially a breakdown product of bacterial action in the gut that predisposes one to developing a form of active atherosclerosis, um, which is basically we all have at least in the West, adults virtually all have atherosclerotic disease, so fatty buildup of cholesterol and cholesterol derived substances lining the walls of our blood vessels, including our coronary arteries, sometimes blocking them, causing heart attacks at times and other forms of heart problems like congestive heart failure. So, what was interesting, if you actually go look at the Nature study with which this is concerned, they looked at 4,184 patients in Madrid working at a bank, Santander Bank in Madrid, and they followed them from 2009 up until now. And these were asymptomatic people. These were healthy bank employees. Um, and they got really world-class levels of imaging, the kind of coronary imaging that you wouldn't get unless you had disease and were in a wealthy nation. But these people were getting it routinely to try to track the development of disease. And they found some startling things. The first was that between the ages of 40 and 55, which is traditionally speaking would not be considered very old, there was quite a degree of atherosclerotic disease. So you could consider it a cholesterol fatty buildup in the coronary arteries. 63% of 40 to 55-year-olds had this debris and degradation in their coronary arteries. And they went on to look at some animal models. I think it was a mouse model, seeing if they could figure out a relationship between the imidazole propionate molecules that were created by our guts and atherosclerosis, which there's a strong relationship between the two, and then seeing if they could block the synthesis of this substance and reverse some of the atherosclerosis, which they were able to do. So this is a pretty big study in that it shows at least one more thing that can be targeted over time to reduce our risk of heart attack, which obviously kills a lot of people in Western societies each year. A lot of uh, many people in not very advanced at not very advanced ages with a lot of years left to live. So yeah, there's a big impact that this can have on individuals and on communities. Um, and this is basic science, and it will have to be developed. But it's quite interesting, quite promising, and it does move our understanding of coronary artery disease along quite significantly. And our last story of the day is another science story, and let's get this one teed up. This one was really fascinating to me for a few reasons, not just the scientific one. So, Villa Maria, New Zealand winery, adds a fatal cancer warning label on bottles sold in Ireland. And when I first read this, I just sort of skimmed the article, and I was surprised that a manufacturer would be admitting to any negatives um, to their products that they wouldn't have to. But I think the clue here in the title is that they put the warning label on bottles sold in Ireland. So they're selling the same products, not just in Ireland, but throughout the world and in New Zealand. But we don't get a warning label. And so you might ask why. I initially thought they were being just very honest, but what happens is nearly a year from now, May 2026, these labels will become compulsory. So they just decided to start sooner with reprinting their labels, but only in Ireland because that's the only place that it's compulsory. So this really shows you the limits of self-regulation of industries. You know, ignoring what current politicians may be saying about regulatory overreach and how it would be kinder and simpler and more efficient for companies to just regulate themselves. This shows us the value of compulsory measures to keep patients safer. So the label will say, quote, there is a direct link between alcohol and fatal cancers, close quote, and also that, quote, drinking alcohol causes liver disease, close quote. These are not new findings. They're not controversial. The only people pushing anything other than this would be people who deal in misinformation or disinformation. So it's been known that alcohol consumption is strongly associated with uh, cancers, gastric cancer, liver cancer, um, uh, GI tract cancers, and others, and that drinking alcohol causes liver disease. We've known that forever. Our ability to pick up sort of mild early liver disease has just gotten better and better over time, and it's become very clear that alcohol very quickly affects your liver. It promotes the deposition of fatty deposits in the liver and eventual hepatic steatosis and sometimes frank severe liver disease and cirrhosis and other things. So these are common sense labels that any country would be foolish not to put on a harmful product. So if we want to say that customers are informed, we should at a minimum put these two sentences on there. But of course, we're not doing that, and that's quite concerning to me. There are agencies, organizations, advocacy groups that are trying to get better labeling in New Zealand. There's a global push for it. And there's even the World Health Organization saying, quote, when it comes to alcohol consumption, there is no safe amount that does not affect health. The impacts of this are huge, but and we know it's a carcinogen, but the pushback from the industry, which makes literally billions and billions of dollars from alcohol sales, enormous profits, enormous lobbying groups, enormous ability to donate to political campaigns and support politicians. There's a reason that we're not getting these quite minimalistic labeling laws, despite decades of knowledge. But hopefully it's the kind of thing that if more people push for, if you talk to your member of parliament, more importantly, if you support those who support stronger labeling measures and safety in food, and the people who support regulations for food safety, then I think we can get somewhere that would be more productive than where we are right now. All right, that's it for this week's Frontline. We'll see you next time. Like and subscribe if you want more of this content. We try to cover all the things that affect the health and well-being of the community, of the public, of regular people, whether it's policy or science. And I hope you find it enlightening and valuable and worthwhile. We'll see you next time.